I'm Craig Kenny, Executive Director of the Addison County Economic Development Corporation. Thanks for coming today. We appreciate our co-sponsors, the Addison County Chamber, and the folks from the Vermont Agency of Commerce and Community Development. So a few months ago, we had the Middlebury Economic Health Committee, which I chair, had a roundtable in here, and it just became obvious, evident that there were folks in the room who'd been here a while, but didn't realize that even that Middlebury had a designated downtown, or what it really meant to the downtown, to the businesses, to the town. And I figured, well, that's probably the same in Bristol and Vergennes as well, and I asked around, it was true. But because designations happened like years ago, and there's been new entrepreneurs, new businesses come along, and new people working in the town, and so it just kind of gets lost. So I thought it'd be great to have a little bit of a refresher for people who wanted it. So we've got the folks from the state designation program here today. So we've got Gary Holloway that's going to talk about the downtown program, Caitlin Corkins, who runs the tax credit portion of it, and Julia Cannell from the community development program. You might know that as CDBG, the grant program. So they're going to tell us about the state downtown designations, state village center designations. There's a lot of other designations, but I'm not going to get into those or not today. Probably stick with downtown and village centers. If you have questions on the others, feel free to ask. And also talk about what the benefits of those designations are. What does it mean for a downtown to be designated? And then what does it mean to the towns, the officials, and the municipal officials, and the businesses here to have that designation? What are the benefits? So again, there's some handouts over there you can get afterwards. Help yourself to a beverage if you need it. A little bit of dessert, and if you wouldn't mind checking off your name on the list, I'd appreciate it. Again, thanks for coming, and we'll hand it off to you. Great. Take it away.
All right, thanks. So I'm going to kick it off. My name is Gary Holloway. I manage the downtown program for the state, which is one of the designated programs we have on the Council of Development. Again, we'll follow my co-workers here to talk about more specifics. Before I get started, I'm just curious. I always like to know who my audience is. How many folks are here from Vergennes? Anyone from Vergennes? Bristol? And then Middlebury? The rest of you? And then other?
East Middlebury.
East Middlebury? Okay.
Cornwall.
And then how many folks are like property owner or businesses? And then how many folks are representing municipalities? And then other organizations? Okay. All right. Just like to kind of get a sense. A lot of our, there's benefits in our program that are directly related to municipalities where they'd be an applicant for certain programs, and there's other programs that we have, through Department of Economic Development that might be more of a direct benefit to businesses, but a lot of what we do in our programs has a indirect or direct benefit to business and property owners in downtowns. So keep that in mind. I'm happy, at the end here, the three of us are happy to kind of answer questions. If we don't hit the mark for why you're here and what you were hoping to get out of it, we want plenty of time for open kind of discussion that we might be able to touch on some of those things that we don't cover in the presentation, or be able to maybe point you towards other coworkers that might be able to assist with certain business needs, for example. As Fred mentioned, we have there's 5 designation programs that we manage at the Department of Housing and Community Development. There's 3 core designations, and then there's 2 kind of add-ons. I'm going to touch on village centers and downtowns. New town centers were created because there were some areas that didn't really have existing old settlement patterns. These were new communities, basically, and they wanted something too. So we gave a couple new town center designations, places like South Burlington that didn't really have a historic core. But I am going to touch on the village center and downtown program. Neighborhood development area is something that can be an add-on, and it's a benefit for housing developers or municipalities and housing developers to offer some incentives to build new housing that has, so I'll leave it there. I'm not going to go into details of that program. So the Village and Downtown program was established about 20 years ago, and the state The reason the state set it up was because they wanted to be able to incentivize state resources towards communities that were doing the right thing, that were setting up zoning bylaws or trying to preserve historic buildings, trying to keep kind of that Vermont character of their communities in place while trying to look forward to the future and making investments in those areas. So in general, this program was set up by the legislature, and our department managed the programs, and we have folks that will apply, municipalities will apply, and we'll walk them through the whole process. We have a total of 189 designated communities across the state, so more are designated than not. 153 village centers, and these are kind of smaller communities that might not have more than just a church and municipal building, and maybe they have a few civic pieces, but not like the Middleburys or the Bristols or the Vergennes that have much larger settlement patterns. I put this on here. We have a planning atlas on our website. If you are curious to learn a little bit more about where these areas are, there's several different layers on this planning atlas on the Agency of Commerce's website. Feel free to play with it. It is a helpful tool too for those of you that may need it for other purposes. Here's a look at who's designated in Addison County, and there are some other communities that have expressed interest. My coworker Richard Amore works with the smaller Village Center program. And I often say I pinch hit for him because I have 23 downtowns, we've got 150 villages, so I do find myself visiting with some of those communities from time to time as well. As I mentioned, we have 23 designated downtowns, and one of the things that makes the downtown program a little bit different than the village program, it's a little bit more complicated to get an application approved because we require water, wastewater capacity for future development, for example, that some of the villages might not have. We require there to be a downtown organization, a nonprofit in place. We also require there to be some zoning specific to like a design control district or a local historic district. So they have a lot more hurdles that they have to go through in order to get designated, where the village designation process is relatively easy to get set up, and if you don't have access to the benefits are really important for those communities and very beneficial. With each of the designated programs, we establish a boundary to determine where is kind of the historic settlement pattern. We typically don't include like large, just residential neighborhoods, for example, which is really kind of the commercial core of the historic districts. As it relates to the benefits, and obviously, Caitlin can elaborate more, but we have a tax credit program. And so if your property is within that boundary, you're eligible. If you're outside of that boundary, you're not eligible. So some of our programs are very black and white that way, where property is in or they're out. But there's other programs that we may have, like our downtown transportation fund grant that we have, for example, where a project could potentially happen just adjacent to that boundary if it's having a direct benefit to that area. So I just wanted to point that out, that we do kind of establish an area for the sake of eligibility for different funding. Here's a snapshot of, if you look at the bottom portion below the line, these are village center and downtown benefits, and above the line are downtown benefits. We have a lot of, like I mentioned, I'm going to touch on here in just a minute some of the different grant programs that we have access to, but there's also some permitting relief, some Act 250 relief in designated areas for housing projects, for example, or other large projects. And then there's state priorities for BGS, if they're relocating BGS properties. The downtowns are considered a high priority area to relocate those offices, and that's something that we try to work pretty closely with the BGS and give us a heads up and give our communities a heads up when they're thinking about relocating or moving offices, which there's a lot of that happening right now. From our state offices in Barrie, we have a lot of workers that are moving over there. And a few other benefits that I'll touch on in just a second here. The other benefit that you have as kind of an indirect benefit, we have programs that we manage directly through downtown, our Department of Housing and Community Development, but then we have other agencies such as VTrans and A&R that have other grant programs that we've been able to kind of get our fingers on and say, hey, can we make that a priority, get priority consideration for applicants if they are within a designated village or a designated downtown. And so here's an example of a few. There's a funding directory up on that table that has a lot of other programs that we may or may not get priority consideration for as being part of the designated program. As I mentioned before, one of the things that makes the downtown program unique is that we require the municipality to partner with a downtown organization that's its own nonprofit, has its own board of directors. It doesn't have to report directly to the city council or select board, but they're working kind of in conjunction, in partnership with each other. So, in Middlebury, it's the Middlebury Partnership, and we have Bristol Core and Vergennes Partnership and Vergennes. And so each of those organizations will have a staff, either a part-time or a full-time staff, and they're getting direct funding from the municipality to help support. They don't get all of their funding, but they get some contribution of money from the municipality to make that organization or support the organization. There's a variety of things that these organizations can do. This is just a snapshot of some of them. Each of them is a little bit different depending on the community that we're talking about. But in general, they're supporting existing businesses. They're trying to attract businesses and work with property owners or work with the economic development committees to try to help make sure there's not a lot of vacancies. They're also doing events and marketing for the downtown, business promotions, beautification. You all are familiar with this from the work that the Middlebury partnerships do, I'm sure. So it's important. One of the nice things about having the downtown organization is that it's a voice and advocate for the property owners and business owners. And so I encourage you to utilize them as kind of a nonpartisan voice when things get sticky in government and you need someone to help stand up. You can work with chambers or downtown organizations to kind of help you with these efforts. One of the other things we do, we offer a lot of trainings for not just our staff of our downtown programs, but for municipal leaders, for board members, volunteers, other organizations. We have an annual historic preservation conference that we do each year in partnership with the Preservation Trust of Vermont. This year it happens to be that we're doing it in Montpelier on June 5th. We'll be opening registration for that soon. That's a great opportunity for folks to learn a lot about work that's happening all around the state. And I always encourage folks to step out of your box sometimes and go to one of these trainings or go visit with another community and learn what they're doing. There's a lot to learn there. And then we offer an advocacy day, usually each year in February or March, to try and pitch to the legislature, pat ourselves on the back and say, hey, we're doing good work, but we really need some support in these areas, and sometimes do some testifying in committees to try and move some legislation along that might be supportive for our downtown program. So I have this in here. I mean, it's really important you all are here because you have businesses or you have properties or because you care about the other communities you're in. And a lot of the work that we do outside of our grant programs is really just developing relationships with folks and trying to figure out how we can help support whatever it is that they're trying to do. We don't often have the resources to be able to kind of handhold a business all the way through a business plan kind of thing, but we do have the ability to kind of pull funders together and have conversations about how we can support whatever it is that you're trying to do in your community. You want to support vibrant downtowns. One of the programs that I administer directly is the Downtown Transportation Fund, and this is something that's only available for designated downtowns, not for the designated villages, although we'd like to expand that. We have about $350,000 annually. We can grant up to $100,000 with a 50% match, and this is for municipalities to apply. If you see this picture here, this is Vergennes, kind of a before and after, and I think this is a good example of how a business can directly benefit from something a municipality can apply for. In this particular scenario, the property owners actually contributed some of the cost of this project, and the municipality contributed some of the cost to make it so that all these businesses had ADA accessibility. And it was a beautification effort to try to just make the downtown more attractive. So that was a great project that they were awarded, and they've been able to kind of chip away applying for these funds year after year with small to larger projects. These are a variety of things that can be used for downtown transportation fund. In general, this is state money, so it's a little bit easier to navigate than some of the federal money that Julia has to deal with. So we have a bit of flexibility on the kind of creative projects that we can do. For example, you have this major project in your downtown happening, and it's possible for the town to be able to tag on money to make a park more beautiful. That's part of that transportation project. So this is a great resource for communities to utilize on transportation-related projects to improve their downtowns. We have municipal planning grants that any municipality can apply for. They don't have to be part of the downtown designation or village designation program, but good applications that come in that are designated typically get funded. And the nice thing about these planning grants as well is they are relatively flexible. Here's a few examples of what they've been used for with economic development studies and plans, or zoning bylaws to make housing more easier to build, more attractive for developers to want to build. The Cabot Revitalization Plan was a good example of an economic development plan that really worked very closely with their downtown, their village businesses and the community to develop a plan for the future that was really going to work for the existing businesses, but also recognizing that there's possibilities for the future. Middlebury was just recently awarded a Better Connections grant, which is kind of a municipal planning grant on steroids. So it's a lot more funding as opposed to maybe $20,000 that you'd get in a municipal planning grant. These are, closer to $70,000 or $80,000 grants, and they can. Typically, we award 3 of them, and Middlebury was awarded 1 to do a downtown master plan, which I think is a great opportunity as Middlebury is looking at kind of this new chapter in its life, maybe. There's been a lot of transition happening here with not just physical transformations, but also, some businesses closing and new businesses wanting to open up, and people looking at redeveloping some buildings. So this master plan can take a look at not just transportation, but also look at economic development opportunities, look at the built environment connections that you have to other parts of your community. So that process will be kicking off later this year. We also manage electric vehicle supply equipment program with money that we got through a lawsuit from VW since they cheated on their emission standards. So the state got about $18 million to go back to kind of decrease NOx emissions, but we carved off $2.4 million to put towards a EVSE grant program, which businesses are eligible, municipalities are eligible, property owners. There's a wide range of folks that can apply for that. Grants are due April 30th if you really want to get in this round. Otherwise, stay tuned for future rounds. As I mentioned, we have the funding directory up here. It also lives up on our website, ACEDC, Agency of Commerce Community Development website. So feel free, we kind of update this from time to time with some of our other partner organizations and has funding that's available. We also put out a newsletter quarterly, roughly, that has information, once again, about what our program's doing, what other communities are, success stories that you're seeing from other communities. So if you'd like to sign up for that, that's also available on our website. Just let me know and I can send you to get you signed up. That's what I have for now. Like I said, I wanted to really make sure I had plenty of time to answer more detailed questions that you might have. Make sure you're getting one out of it. I'm going to pass it off to Caitlin to get into the text.
In the new document here.
Hi everyone,
everyone. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Caitlin Corkins. I run the Downtown and Village Center Tax Credit Program, among other things. That's really what I'm going to focus on today. But I guess the first thing I always like to tell people is if you have any thoughts of a project you're going to work on and you think, I wonder if this would qualify for tax credits, or I wonder if I would be able to use this program, please give me a call. The earlier the better. The sooner I get involved, the more likely that I can help you, even if it's not with this program, with finding a source to help you do your project. So I always like to start with what are tax credits? Taxes, it sounds like it's probably terrible and scary and taxes are awful and nobody likes taxes, but this is actually not a really difficult program. It's not a grant, so it's not your sort of typical government grant kind of program. But what these are credits that reduce the income taxes you pay to the state of Vermont. So it's better than a deduction. A deduction reduces your taxable income. A tax credit reduces your tax payment, dollar for dollar. So the program has been around for about 20 years now. Does a lot of really great things around the state, encouraging development of properties that are blighted, where they've been vacant for many, many years. Nobody's been able to figure out how to tackle it. Incentivizing housing projects in and around our downtowns. Making rebuilding possible after disaster. Unfortunately, I don't think there's a single community in the state that hasn't seen some kind of flood or fire or something like that. And those can be really hard to come back from. So one of the goals of this program is to make it possible. So really, really briefly, I'm going to touch on a federal tax credit program that I also administer, just because it does sometimes overlap with this state program. So it's called the Federal Rehabilitation Investment Tax Credit, or RITC program. It is for projects that are for historic rehabilitation projects. So the building has to be listed in the National Register of Historic Places to qualify. And if you have a building you think might be historic but you're not sure, you can always get in touch with us and we will let you know we have all those records. It may be the building isn't listed already, but it could be listed, and then it would be eligible for the program. A lot of our downtowns and village centers also have National Register districts that are already in place. And so if a building is in one of those districts and it's contributing, then it would be qualified for this program. So it offers a 20% federal income tax credit for a rehabilitation of one of these historic buildings. So that's a tax credit on your federal income tax liability. Includes all the work you might do to the building, both on the exterior and the interior, including things like upgrading your heating systems or your electrical equipment or whatever it might be. The program is great in that there are no deadlines. It's just whenever you're ready, you can apply. They accept applications at any time. And there are unlimited credits available. So if you qualify and you apply to this program, you can build that credit into your budget, into your pro forma. It is important to apply before you start work on a project because it is an all or nothing. Either your project's going to qualify or it's not. So you want to know that up front. And the work that you do on the project has to meet preservation standards. It is a historic preservation-based economic development program. So again, just to reiterate what I said at the beginning, if you have a project, say you bought a building or you are occupying a building that you think might be historic and you are anticipating a big project ahead, I encourage folks to reach out to me early. We can figure out if this would be a good fit for your project and how you could structure your project to meet the requirements of the federal program. Enough said about that one. So this state program is sort of meant to work hand in hand with the federal program, but it does have some important differences. We have a cap on how much we can give out in state credits each year. Right now it's at $2.4 million. We are hopefully going to be seeing an increase in that in the coming year. There is some legislation that's going through the State House right now that we're pretty optimistic about at this point. That would increase that to $2.6 million, which would be great. because the program is quite competitive. We get more requests each year than we can handle, and so unfortunately, we can't award credits to all the projects that qualify. Another difference between the state program and the federal program is that to qualify, a building doesn't necessarily need to be historic, but it does need to be located within one of these designated downtowns or village centers. And that's where those maps that Gary showed in his presentation come in. That's why you're either in or you're out. Now it's important to know that those boundaries are not necessarily set in stone. They can be amended. So if there is a particular project that the town is looking at, it's something that's just outside the boundary, but pretty close. The downtown board is willing to take a look at those boundaries at any of their monthly meetings and discuss whether or not the boundary could be amended so that a project could qualify for the program. Also important to note the due date, July 1st each year. Again, because we have a cap on how much we give out, we do these on an annual cycle. And I know July 1st is kind of a bummer for construction projects in Vermont because that's right in the middle of construction season, but that's also the beginning of the state's fiscal year, so that's when it is. So there are some different types of credits through this program. This is, again, something that's slightly different than the federal program where it's just straight 20%. This program offers different types of credits for different types of projects. On the table over there is like a little chart that lays all of these different things out, so you don't need to remember them all. And I would also just encourage you, if you think you might apply, to get in touch with me, and I can help you figure out, which of these credits your project could use. I'm going to go through really fast, but just always remember that you can call me and we can talk through your particular project.
Quick silly question, is it 10% of the value that you're putting into the repair or of the tax bill?
Of what you're investing.
Okay.
Yes, good question. Mm-hmm. So it's based on how much you invest, that a percentage of that, and it could be, depending on what type of work it was, one of these types of credits. So the 10% credit is directly tied to that federal program, meaning you have to have an approved application to qualify for that specific tier of credits through the program. It's just sort of meant to be an add-on, so it covers all the same things that the federal program covers. Basically all the work you're doing on the building, whether it's exterior work or interior work. If you're not using the federal program, say your building isn't historic or the project isn't very large or you're just not interested in dealing with the federal program, the other types of credits are still available through just the state program. So the 25% credit for facade repairs, that's exterior work, typically just to the sort of public face of the building. The idea behind that was to encourage property owners and or business owners to make improvements to the sort of public face of their building to either attract customers into a business or attract a tenant into a vacant storefront and just freshen up the downtown, as they say. The technology credit, I'm going to just say with a caveat, this one may be going away, again, depending on legislation. But for right now, it is a credit to install and upgrade data and network wiring, things like Cat5 wiring, that kind of thing. And it's a 50% credit, so potentially half of what you're investing in those improvements. And then the last one, the code credits, definitely the most popular credits through the program. Again, it's a 50% credit, so potentially half of your investment back as a tax credit to bring a building up to current building codes. So this, obviously a lot of the buildings in our downtowns and villages are older buildings. They aren't up to code. If there's a property transfer or a new tenant comes into a space, it often triggers the need to make a lot of these code improvements. So the idea behind this credit was to encourage, to help people make those improvements so that those spaces can be occupied. And that includes the big things like access, elevators, sprinkler systems, but also smaller projects just to upgrade your alarm system or your electrical system or to put in an accessible bathroom or a ramp or something like that. Yes?
The facade credit repairs, does that, is there consideration for improved, like heat loss or anything?
Energy efficiency?
Thank you. That's pretty much true.
Well, I wouldn't say specifically, there isn't like an energy efficiency credit, but if you're doing repairs to, say your windows that would improve their efficiency, yes, that could be part of the facade credit.
I mean, many of the stores in this town now have single glazed
Yeah.
glass.
Mhm.
And that's something where I just think of the heat loss that's going out of the building
Absolutely.
especially when it frosts over white.
So it's more, I would say a more indirect kind of, yes, it could be part of a facade project that you're also doing energy efficiency. Same thing with if you're doing electrical improvements and you're going to put in, LED lights and, change out old fluorescent tubes for more efficient. That's not necessarily an energy efficiency improvement, it's an electrical improvement, but it's doing both. So, yeah, great point. So I get this question quite a bit, some people say, well, tax credit, great, but I don't really pay that much in taxes, what am I going to do with this? That's not going to help me very much. So the credit can be carried forward as a way to sort of use it over time. The other great thing about the state credit is that it's easily saleable to either a bank or an insurance company as a way to monetize it. And this means that if you don't pay a lot in income tax, you can still get some benefit out of your tax credit. It's also a way for a nonprofit organization, like the Bixby Library in Vergennes, for example, to take advantage of the program. Obviously, they're not paying income taxes to the state of Vermont, but they were awarded a credit and they took that to their local bank, sold it to the bank, and got some cash to help them do their project. This seems like it would be really complicated, but it's actually pretty straightforward. A lot of the local banks in Vermont are familiar with the program, routinely buy these credits, so there's an appetite for them, and banks are interested. They're usually buying them at something like 90 cents on the dollar, so if you have the tax liability to use it yourself, you should do that, because then you get the full value. But if you don't, you could still get a pretty good return on this tax credit. And you can also, it makes for a very flexible sort of collateral, I guess is a good way to say it. Say you apply for a credit to do a big project on your building, and you need some upfront capital to do the project. You could take your award letter to your bank and say, I have this credit, could I get a short-term loan, construction loan to do my project? And then when I'm done with my project, I'll pay back my loan by selling you my credit. And so it's a very flexible sort of way to finance a project from the beginning. Yes?
Can you explain that again? Because I thought the idea was that you had to have done the work to apply for the tax credit. So how does what you said actually work then?
You actually, most people apply before they do a project.
Oh, okay.
The project can be underway at the time you apply,
Okay.
but you're not eligible if the project's already done.
Oh, okay. Got it. Yep.
So that's a very important point. If your project's already done, I'm sorry, you can't apply. But because of our annual cycle, the project could be underway at the time of application. That's okay. And if you had a project that you could not undertake unless you got some help, if you could apply before you even started your project, and then if you were awarded the credit, you could use that to get some upfront money to do your project.
What's the in terms of the amount that is applied for each year versus what you have, so out of the 2.4?
Yeah.
What do you normally get?
Well, it's been increasing pretty substantially. I took the program over about 6 years ago, and at that point we had about 1.7 million to give out, and we were getting around 2 million in requests. Last year we had 2.4 million to give out, and we got over 5 million in requests. So we're really hopeful that we'll have this additional bump up this year, because there's a demand for these that seems to be just expanding. I did include a couple of examples in here, just to give you guys a sort of what kinds of things we fund. This is in Hancock. Their general store was flooded during Irene. The owner left, just closed the business, left. And it was vacant for a few years before a local couple decided that the town really needed their general store back. So they were able to apply for the state credits for facade and code improvements. On their $145,000 project, they got almost $20,000 in state tax credits, and they've reopened. It's a really cute little store now. This is a project here in Middlebury that recently wrapped up. This is one that took advantage of both the federal and the state program. So this was a house that had been converted into multi-use. There was a bank, credit union, and apartments. And the new owner bought it and decided to make it all apartments. The bank had moved out and there was a demand for housing. This is a historic building, so they were able to use the federal program, as I mentioned. But as you can see, it's a roughly $500,000 project, and they got over $200,000 when combining the federal and state program. It's a significant chunk of the project in tax credits. And so then the last thing I wanted to touch on really briefly, as if your head wasn't already spinning, is another program that I administer. And the reason that I'm bringing this up here at the end is that this program pulls from that same $2.4 million of funding. So even though it's a different program, it's pulling from that same pot. This is a program that's available for projects in designated downtowns only, so Bristol, Vergennes, Middlebury, but it wouldn't be available for our village centers. And the idea behind this program is actually to help support new construction as opposed to rehab, which is what the tax credit program is really doing. It's a little bit complicated, but basically it's a joint effort, a joint application between a municipality and the developer of a project. They apply for this jointly. And what it does is it reallocates sales taxes that are generated by a development project. So things like on all the materials used in the construction, there's sales tax generated by that. A portion of those sales taxes, tax dollars, are reallocated to that municipality. The municipality takes those tax dollars and does infrastructure that supports the development.
In just that community.
In that community, it has to support that particular
I mean, there's
project.
no skinning money.
No. So there are a few examples. The one on the slide here up in St. Albans is one that was recently completed. You may have heard they built a new hotel in their downtown. So a portion of the sales taxes that were generated by the construction of that hotel went to the city of St. Albans, and St. Albans turned around and used that funding to help support work, infrastructure work along Lake Street, which is where the hotel is. So that included stormwater, paving, planting some street trees, doing lighting, sidewalks, that kind of thing. So that's sort of infrastructure right along the street in front of the hotel there. We have another example in White River Junction that's underway. A big senior housing facility was constructed in their downtown. And similarly, the sales taxes generated by that, a portion were reallocated to the town of Hartford to do a similar sort of infrastructure with wastewater, stormwater, paving of a section of their downtown right near where that housing was happening. A lot of it involved basically making the street and the sidewalk safer for all of those senior residents who are going to be living in that facility to then be able to get to other parts of their downtown where there are the restaurants and the shopping. So it's a little bit of a roundabout way to support new construction, but we're seeing an uptick in interest this program as well. I think there's just more new construction happening in our downtowns, which is an encouraging sign really for the health of the community. Again, if there's something happening, and I guess I'm speaking mostly to municipal folks here, but if there's a project happening in your downtown that you think, huh,
Is there a project happening in our downtown?
is there? You know, could this be another piece of the funding pot? Maybe it could, yeah.
That's approved by the town.
Yeah, the
I mean, the
project,
state just doesn't jump in and say, this is what you're gonna do.
no, oh no, absolutely not.
Because we
No, no,
assume
no.
the money we've taken out in taxes is from the community.
Right. No, I mean, this is a joint application between the developer and the municipality. So the municipality would absolutely need to be on board with both the development project and, you know, what's that infrastructure project going to be.
So I have one question.
Yeah.
Is it primarily the developer then that identifies what those infrastructure improvements that are needed are?
I would say it's a joint effort. I mean, the municipality does have to speak in the application to how that infrastructure supports the development, so it can't be something that's happening on the other side of town. But yeah, I mean, the idea is that it's supporting that development and maybe taking some of the burden off of the developer, which is why it's good for them. But then the municipality is actually getting some funding to do it, you know, the way they want to do it. Make sure it happens. Yeah.
Jumping back to the facade improvements,
Mhm.
are there minimum requirements for what?
In terms of
what
how much-
facade improvements mean?
So you do have to invest at least $5,000 in the project for it to qualify.
Okay, but it doesn't matter what they are, like painting?
It
Is
could
that-
be painting.
Okay.
Yep.
I can't remember which one it was, but one of the federal, the state, but one of them's eligible, vacant buildings are eligible. Is there a length of time the building has to be vacant before it's eligible, not just that it's vacant?
It doesn't even have to be vacant. Vacant or underutilized. You think of a lot of our buildings in our downtowns where maybe upper floors are empty because they're not accessible or they're not up to code. We fund a lot of projects to do that work to make those spaces utilized. Great example from just the last year was the French Block in Montpelier. The upper two floors of that building have been vacant for 75 years.
Yeah.
And now there's housing up there, right
do all
downtown. Yeah.
But
But the Aubergines on the ground floor was there the whole time.
yeah. And the other question I had is, the tax credit program seems to be very competitive. What are some of the criteria you look at to?
Yeah, that's a great question.
You know, what are your check marks for
Yeah,
the best
yeah.
application?
So obviously, we're looking for applications that can talk about how the project is going to fill a need in their community, whether that need is for, you know, to fill an empty storefront, to create more housing that's in the downtown area, to you know, rehabilitate a building after there's been some kind of disaster, whether it be a fire or a flood, so that you don't end up with a hole in the middle of your community. So it's very, very specific to you know, what are the needs in that particular community, and it's going to vary by, you know, what is your town need? Do they really need a general store because the general store closed? And you know, that was a really important community piece of the community that's been lost, and you want to bring that back.
Do you look to the town and regional plans for?
Yeah,
the project
that would be
that's-
great. If the applicant can sort of point to, you know, planning efforts or the town plan or something where they've said, you know, this is a priority for us. We really want to see more of this type of development, or we want to see our historic buildings adaptively reused, or we want to see more housing, or whatever it might be. And that way, you know, it's backing up those assertions. You know, anyone can say, I own a building and I think we should have, you know, another hardware store in town, because we really need one. But is that just your opinion, or is that actually backed up by some kind of evidence? And then, of course, the other thing that they're looking at is what are the impacts? Is it going to create jobs? Is the project going to create jobs? Is it going to attract new businesses? Is it going to make a building that was unsafe safe by making it up to code and putting in a sprinkler system? Is it going to make this building accessible to all people by putting in an elevator? Is it going to create housing where the vacancy rate is really low? So again, talking about what are the needs and what are the impacts? And those are the big keys to a successful application. Yeah.
And who makes that decision?
So there's a downtown board made up of folks from various state agencies, also some governor-appointed positions from local government, some of our partner organizations. They not only do they make decisions on the tax credits, but they also are involved in the designation process itself and designating communities. So they meet once a month, and they have a very tough task of scoring. They do the transportation fund too, right? Yep. So scoring all of these competitive applications that we have. Okay. I'm going to turn it over to you. Okay. One more. And if there are other questions, we're happy to stay after the show.
Yeah. So hi everyone, I'm Julia. Julia Cornell with the Vermont Community Development Program. Just to make your head spin a little further, we'll go through my program now. Yeah, let's see. So I'm not sure how familiar everyone is with CDBG, but the CDBG funds are the Community Development Block Grant funds that are administered through the state from HUD, so they are federal funds. So typically, we tell people that my program is a little more complicated because you are dealing with federal funds, so there are procurement and environmental review processes that must be followed for every single project that goes through the Vermont Community Development Program in order to get the Community Development Block Grant funds. Again, I can't emphasize enough, every project has to go through our environmental review process for these funds. It doesn't matter if you've gone through an Act 250 environmental review process or anything like that. You still have to follow the BCDP environmental review process. With that said, we have a great environmental review officer who will walk you through the process every step of the way. Our applications are online. Everything's done online through our peers system. So you will have one application that's actually for your project for CDBG, and then you will have one application that's for your environmental review. Again, our environmental review officer, Quinn Mann, whose contact information is at the bottom of my handout over there and at the end of this slideshow. She's amazing and she can help you through the entire process for that. My job is to basically help people apply through the program. We'll talk about what makes it an eligible project. And we have 3 community development specialists. We break up the state by counties. So I am representative for Addison County, which you are all a part of. Like Caitlin mentioned, we do have board meetings as well, so we do have a board that makes the funding decisions. Those board members are appointed by the governor. We have 3 board meetings a year, so the projects are sort of rolling if you can meet those certain application deadlines. And all of that information is on our website, and we have a whole program guide on our website, which I also am going to emphasize is very helpful in getting through our program. So utilize our website as much as possible. We do have some key factors for success are meeting our thresholds, having a full, complete application, and how competitive your project is. We do see sometimes, applications that come into us that aren't fully complete, the budget's not complete, or cost estimates aren't there, and that's going to make your project less competitive. So, in talking about our general thresholds, again, because these are federal funds, you have to meet certain national objectives. We have certain state objectives that you have to meet, and you have to meet an eligible activity within those objectives. There are other thresholds for certain projects. We deal with a lot of housing projects, a lot of economic development projects, so those are going to have some sort of different thresholds as well, more project specific. And we just really ask that you contact your CD specialist, which is me. So call me, no questions too small. We do have a pre-application on our website as well that I've found that the projects that complete the pre-application, it's very helpful because then you know what you're getting into sort of before you fill out the application. So it's always advisable to fill out a pre-application form. So a complete application for us would include filling out the whole forms menu on our application page. I mentioned we are an online system, so it's our peers system. You will go in there. We have our administrative assistant, Cindy Blondin, who opens up the applications for you, and completing the application is a little lengthy. It depends on how familiar you are with the project or how, I guess, tech savvy you are with the online system, but usually I tell people about 2 months is the time frame, obviously give or take per project, but that's the usual time I advise people for allowing themselves to work on the application. With that said, I forgot to mention, all of our applications and all of our projects all of our funds are administered to a municipality. So the municipality is our grantee, and the municipality can sub-grant. We do loans, but we're moving away from loans and trying to stay more with sub-granting funds. So a municipality can sub-grant the funds to a business or a limited partnership, project depending again. So we'll work with businesses. We do some for-profit business loans, but again, the municipality is still going to be the grantee for that. So procurement and environmental reviews are followed every application. I can't stress that enough. And the competitiveness of the project we are seeing. Again, we have 3 board meetings a year. We just had our last board meeting last week. We have one coming up in June, and we are seeing them become more and more competitive. So we are starting to just kind of let people know that this is becoming a very competitive process. An application is found to be more competitive if there's a municipal contribution, if there's a higher number of benefit achieved for us, meaning, if there's a higher number of affordable housing units, a greater number of jobs created, greater number of low to moderate income individuals served through the project. And then we have other questions on our application, again, like are you in a designated downtown, and questions like that as well to just help us weed out what makes the project more competitive. Helpful tips. Don't assume anything. Again, always just call us and ask questions if you're unsure if your project qualifies. With the environmental review process with BCDP, there are things called choice limiting actions that people, if they have made a choice limiting action before getting their environmental release letter, it's going to make you ineligible for the environmental review. So again, we just stress working with our environmental officer to avoid those choice limiting actions, and those would be things like going out to bid for construction projects before you have your environmental release, or already having a contract or already purchasing a building, or certain things like that. And again, Quinn Mann, environmental officer, she's awesome. So let me talk a little bit about what the state and national objectives are and what makes people eligible. We have the 3 national objectives, which are urgent need, slum and blight, and low to moderate income individuals. A lot of our projects draw benefit from serving low to moderate income individuals. That tends to be affordable housing, economic development projects. We look at job retention and job creation. We do public facility and public service projects as well under our state objectives, and those could be things like a community center, or if there's a nonprofit who provides a service, looking to expand those services as well. But again, all of our applicants are units of government, so we fund all cities except for Burlington because they have their own pot of CDBG money. They are what we call an entitlement community. But otherwise, we serve all other towns and cities and most of the incorporated villages. If there are a few towns working, if there's a big project that say is going to happen and it's going to benefit people in Middlebury and Vergennes and Bristol or somewhere else, you can work together with municipalities to have a consortium application for our program as well. That doesn't happen too often, but it is a possibility. Yeah, it doesn't happen often. And our grant types are under the categories of implementation, planning, and accessibility modifications. So, I know we funded a planning grant for a child care center in Vergennes a couple of years ago. So they're working on doing planning for that, and then eventually they may come in for implementation funds. So that is allowed, but a municipality can't have more than one implementation application come in per board meeting. So if there's a project already coming through the city of Vergennes for the June board meeting, then they're not going to have more than one implementation. They could have a planning grant come in if it's a different type of application, but we do try to limit that to just the one per board meeting. And the program areas we focus on are economic development, housing, public facilities, public services, and handicap accessibility modifications. So those are our accessibility modifications grants. Those are only for municipally owned buildings to make them more ADA compliant and do those other sort of accessibility modifications that are necessary. In terms of eligible activities for what our funds can go towards for certain projects that fall under economic development or housing or public facility and public services. I have a list up here. There's 18 eligible activities. This list is on our website as well, so you can go on there and look at it.
You don't have to memorize it.
Yeah, you don't have to memorize it now. But like certain projects are only housing, or certain, I should say, activities are housing specific and certain activities are planning specific or public facilities, vice versa. So this chart is just pretty helpful to show you that if you're doing a project that involves sewer, it's going to fall. If you're doing an economic development project and you want to put our funds towards the sewer, you're able to do that. Or if you're doing a housing project and you're looking to put the funds towards, I don't know, any of those things, basically. Yeah. Oh, anywhere there's checked. Yeah, there is. But things that are not eligible or ineligible funding activities for CDBG are municipal government activities. So we can do work, like I mentioned, the ADA work on the buildings, but we can't fund activities for municipal government. We can't fund school education activities, fire and police, ambulance, emergency 911 phone systems, and then because again, they're federal funds, that things are always changing with HUD, so it's always best to just consult the federal statute and be sure nothing's been updated, but usually we're alerted by that time. So to talk about funding and amounts for our projects, The accessibility modification grants range anywhere from $5,000 to a $75,000 cap. And there is a 25% cash or cash-in-kind match with accessibility modification grants. For the implementation grants, it's anywhere from 50 to a cap at $1 million. For public facility projects such as community centers and such, there is a $500,000 cap, or a nonprofit organization or whatever is considered public facility, you're capped at $500,000, sorry. And then our planning grants range from $3,000 to $60,000. And those can be anything from feasibility studies, market studies, architectural designs, engineering, sort of that pre-development work. That's where we focus our planning grants. So with that said, here's a list of our staff. The first three are our CD specialists, meet with Addison County. Quinn Mann, our environmental officer, again, can't stress enough, contact her early if you're considering CDBG funds. Joe LeClaire is our procurements and contracts grant specialist, and he's someone who sort of you'll definitely work with at the end of things, because again, with these funds there is procurement and closeouts and back and grants. Yeah, it's a lot of paperwork. And Cassie Bell is our audits and financial management person. So that's sort of this BCDP team. And any questions, please feel free to ask, call, whatever. Yeah, that's sort of a high-level overview of the program.
You kept referring to our website, and maybe it was up earlier, but what is the website?
So it's the Agency of Commerce and Community Development website. It should be on the handout. Yeah, I apologize if it wasn't on the presentation. Should have my presentation first. But yeah, and there's a specific Vermont Community Development Program page on the
Yeah, when you
website.
go into the web page, there'll be a couple tabs. You can go into economic development, which we haven't really touched on some of the programs that are available there. There's historic preservation, community development. There's a few options you can kind of go and start diving.
Thank you very much. Any other questions for him? Okay.
No, I was just gonna say, given your experience with Middlebury, 'cause that's where I'm, are there projects that have taken advantage of some of these tax credits or grant programs that you can point to so that people are aware what types of projects have been utilized?
Sure. Well, if we want to, there have been a number of tax credit projects in Middlebury. There's that housing one on Washington Street that I showed. There have been the National Bank of Middlebury building. Town Hall Theater has applied for tax credits. I'm working with the folks who own the Stone Mill. They're going to apply for federal tax credits to help support that project. So yeah, there are a number of
Is that the only one that's in the works right now that you're aware of?
Yes.
So,
Oh, for federal tax credits, I think yes, but I think that's all for now. But yeah, there's always new things coming in. We funded a project, the Mattel block, got state tax credits last year to support the work they did on the upper floors of the building there.
Any CDBG?
I know, it's a mouthful to say. I trip myself up on it sometimes still.
In the county?
Yeah, so like I mentioned, there's a planning grant in Vergennes for a child care center. We had spoken with the women at the Stone.
The
Stone Mill.
Yeah, and so they had unfortunately already purchased the building, so that was a choice limiting action, and they couldn't go through our environmental review process. There's another planning grant in Middlebury working with the mobile home parks for their sewer and infrastructure. I don't think that we have any active implementation grants in Middlebury right now.
Bristol's got one not quite ready to go to the board, right?
Yeah, Bristol's working on a housing and commercial business project. yeah, they may be coming in for a June board meeting, but it might be further down the line. They're still working on that. Yeah.
Yeah,
I got some moment.
What,
There's another question back there.
Yeah, could you shed a little more light on the impact of the Act 250 application in a downtown designated area?
Are you thinking about relief from Act 250? in the
Yeah, what
downtown?
is the relationship there? I assume there was some.
yeah, there is. It's kind of complicated, but it depends on the nature of the project. You know, if you're coming in for a priority housing project, then there's going to be some potential Act 250. It's kind of like an off-ramp provision that'll allow a faster process for that particular development project. But it's not for any Act 250 triggered project. It really has to have that priority housing component for it to even be eligible for that. Now, I will say just that our department, as well as a number of other partners, have been working on trying to change some of the Act 250 rules as they apply to designated downtowns. I don't anticipate anything changing this year, but I do think that there's an appetite amongst a wide sector of partners to make that change real, to give it even more of a benefit beyond the priority housing. But I think we're maybe a couple years off.
Yeah, generally, regional development corporations are following the proposed changes to Act 250 in the legislature pretty closely, and it's looking like nothing will make it out of even one of the bodies this year. So it'll be next year before any proposed changes come about, but folks at the administration and the regional development corporations are pushing for an off-ramp, as Gary called it, for downtowns and for industrial parks as part of that discussion. But it doesn't look like even what they're working on will come out of the legislature until after this biennium, which is the end of next legislative session. But we're pushing to get something in there on both those issues.
Thank you.
So we're one of 12 RDCs around the state, Addison County Economic Development Corporation. So together we're working on, that's one of the issues we're pushing for in the legislature. Ryan, you had a question?
Priority housing, can you explain the definition of priority housing?
Right, well, I guess, I don't know, whatever, I mean, we do housing needs assessments throughout the state, and we find that a lot of, housing's a big need across the state, and I'm not sure.
It has to hit the income, it has to hit the income, I'm trying to remember, what is it, 80%?
Yeah, so we have income eligibility requirements for low to moderate income individuals. That's based on HUD's definition of low to moderate income. So individuals who are at the 80% low to moderate income level or below are considered to be in the low income slots. So our affordable housing projects allow up to that 80% LMI for those units, and you're considered an affordable housing project if you are serving that population.
So if you're doing a housing project and let's say there's 30 units and 10% of them are set aside for folks under that threshold, does that then make you a priority housing project, which then provide some Act 250?
Yeah, I can't remember, there is a percentage, and I can't, off the top of my head, I can't remember what that ratio is. I don't know. I could, if you're really eager to find out, I can get you that information. Happy to, I just off the top of my head, I can't remember what that ratio is of priority housing versus market rate, or, it's a percentage, and I can't remember the percentage.
Okay.
Sorry.
Yeah,
This is one more call us at the beginning, what did your
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, we fund mixed income housing projects, but we do draw our benefit from that low to moderate income side of things. So we're not going to fund projects that don't include.
Vermont Housing Conservation Board received some money a couple years ago, and I think they're potentially getting additional money. It's going to meet kind of the higher kind of workforce housing needs across the state that is up to 120 of median household income. So that's an area, in terms of Housing Vermont and these other groups that are looking to try and help, and private developers that are trying to move beyond just meeting the needs of the 80%, but also trying to move to a little bit higher income level threshold. So I think the state recognizes that there is a need beyond just the priority housing to help incentivize. And there's some other work that's being done around housing as well to try to make that make it a little bit easier for communities to build housing. It's a need everywhere.
So before I got smart and moved to Addison County, and took the economic development job, I worked at this agency with these guys for 15 years, and before that was Senator Leahy for 15 years. So I have pretty broad familiarity with all these programs, at the surface. So I'm happy to have a conversation with anyone that has a vision of a project for the area, and I can give you kind of an overview of these programs and all the other programs that might be applicable to your project. I mean, as Gary mentioned earlier, there's some programs at the other side of the house in the Department of Economic Development, like the Vermont Employment Growth Incentive, which I used to run, and the Vermont Training Program. So there's other federal programs, there's other state programs, in addition to these downtown programs that can sometimes come into play for certain projects. So happy to have a conversation with you about that and what we might be able to help, what applications we can help with here locally. But in the end, I'm going to direct you to these folks for their programs because they know the details. But I can start, give you an overview and start the conversation with you. So you don't make a, what's it called? Choice limiting action and take yourself out of the program.
Yeah.
There's a similar thing in the state's business incentive program called the but-for. And if you don't meet the but-for, in other words, but for the incentives, you wouldn't do your activity, then you can't get into that program either. So there's these subtleties that are maddening. But
It's so true. I mean, there's so many programs out there, and they all have their own requirements and intricacies, and we are not trying to be like, haha, you can't use it. Like, we're not trying to figure out ways to not let you use the programs. We want you to use the programs.
yeah, these guys want to get you to yes.
So the sooner that we get involved, the better, because then we can make sure that you're accessing the programs that are going to be the best fit for what you're trying to accomplish.
Yeah, and for the BCDP program specifically, I think too, a lot of times we do try to fit you in. I mentioned, choice limiting actions and all that stuff. The program is, from my point of view, more flexible than people think, because we do try to work with you to get you into one of those categories and help really find the best fit for your project. And if it's CDBG, we'd love to help. If it's not, we'll refer you to someone else.
So can you just clarify, all of your applicants are municipalities?
Yes.
How frequently are the municipalities teamed up with a private entity versus just the municipality reaching out to you directly?
Yeah, no, usually it's the private entities that reach out to us, and we'll, let them know that you need to work with your town as well. You get the town behind you, and then as long as the town's willing to be the applicant on your behalf, then we'll work typically more with the business.
Okay.
And then, the town needs to be involved, but as long as they're supportive, yeah, it's usually privately driven.
You usually find that the municipality at the time might not have the capacity. Middlebury's a little different because they have more staff, but they might not have the time to work with the developer to develop an application, but they've got a whole list of consultants that can work with developers to help you develop an application. We can help sometimes, but we're in the same situation. Our capacity is, I mean, we have 2 people, so.
Right, and there are programs that'll help with grant writers or things like that. The READY program has funds specific for grant writers, just to even fill out our application for you.
Can you say a little more about, you said you're moving away from
REDI, R-E-D-I.
Vermont Housing Conservation Board is
part of the farm.
Yeah,
Viability requirement.
so, Liz Gleason from the Vermont Housing Conservation Board was the person to talk to about the READY program. I don't think it's in the funding directory, no, because we weren't sure if it was going beyond a pilot program.
They did get funding this
They did
year.
get
We have a client using them right now, and she's very happy. So they hire a consultant to work with you,
Yep,
and it gets paid through this grant program.
yeah.
You mentioned that you're moving away from, usually if it's for a business, if the CDBG application is for a business, the grant goes to the municipality and the municipality loans it to the business, maybe at low interest, but they loan it. You mentioned something about moving away from that?
Yeah, so I mean, that's what we do for-profit businesses, for our economic development projects, for
That's
our
still the case.
job creations, yes, that's still the case, but in terms of loans for like other projects, we're mostly focusing on trying to sub-grant the funds. It's just cleaner for everyone involved. That being said, there are some times when it's going to have to still be a loan, but
And that's up
That's why
to the
we
municipality, right?
the municipality and, just working with our program to see what structure and what fits best. Because we've had we've had for-profit businesses come in and then they find that they're able to work with us to do a public facilities project where they're putting our funds towards the water and infrastructure, and that's something that, we can do, and then you're kind of avoiding that loan process, and the town will then be sub-granting the funds. That's where it starts to get complicated, and then it's project specific, but that's why I do mention we have some flexibility there, in just figuring out where your project fits in best with our program.
Any other questions?
Sorry, one more. On the tax credit program, is the application process for the federal and state programs, is it at all the same, or are you applying for federal programs first and then state? And that's the first question. And the follow-up to that is, if you apply to the federal program first, I assume, and you get the federal credits, does that have any impact on your likelihood of being more competitive in the state program?
Okay, so they are separate applications, and the federal one is more difficult. I wouldn't say it's as difficult as your program. But I administer that program too, so I would be working with you on both. And there are also consultants to help with the federal applications for the tax credit program as well, who put those together all the time. In terms of competitiveness for the state program, there isn't a specific criteria that you would get bonus points for going through the federal program, but I would say on the whole, those do tend to be more competitive. They're more fully developed projects usually when they get to the point of applying for the state program. They tend to be larger projects with more of an impact. So I think without there being like a specific criteria, I think they compare well, given the competitiveness of the state program. So that's a non-answer to your question.
Are you aware of the entities in our area that are willing to buy tax credits?
Yeah, so National
Bank
Bank of Middlebury does buy them. What is Merchants Bank now? Community Bank. So merchants have been buying them pretty regularly. Since they've gone through that transition, I don't know of any, but I'm sure they probably will continue to do that. But we find
Co-op insurance.
Co-op insurance has bought some, yeah. We don't see as many insurance companies, but there's no rule saying that you have to go with a certain bank or insurance company, any bank or insurance company that pays, taxes to the state of Vermont can buy the credits. Credit unions cannot buy the credits. They don't pay the state taxes. And we find in general that working with local banks is easier, just because it's easier to get to a person who can actually make a decision for you. And our projects in Vermont tend to be small in the big picture of things, even though they're not small to us. So sometimes the big banks, it's just small peanuts for them and they're just not interested.
Is it limited to banks and insurance companies that can buy those?
Yes.
Is there anything that we didn't touch on that you were hoping to get out of today? Do you have any question about anything? Okay. I always tell folks that we can be a conduit to get you, you feel free to contact us, and we may not know the answer, but we probably know someone who does. So feel free to contact us, and we're happy to kind of get you to where you need to go.
Thank you all for coming. Appreciate being here today. And thanks to the Chamber and the 3 downtown organizations for sponsoring today. And thank you guys from the agency for coming down, talking to us. Appreciate it.
Thank you.